Okay, we'll start with this. Well, these images were posted very recently, and they appear to display Alexander Povetkin in preparation in camp for the upcoming fight with Anthony Joshua. Also seen in these images is Daniel Dubois, Dynamite Daniel Dubois. And these images have got a lot, they got a lot of people talking because Povetkin appears noticeably worse for wear. He appears to have a cookie on the left side of his face, and the inference that people are making is that this is a cookie that he got from fucking around with Daniel Dubois. Now, I'll say that this is all part of the process. This is all preparation. This is all an occupational hazard, that there are gonna be, bumps in the road. But looking at these images, my thought process is that Alexander Povetkin is working very hard in camp. He is preparing to go to war with Anthony Joshua. And that's what resonates with me as I look at these images, that he is in camp against a very physically imposing and younger fighter. A scenario that directly reflects what he's going to be facing in Anthony Joshua, who is a physically imposing fighter who also happens to be the younger fighter. I'll tell you that having Daniel Dubois there, Dynamite Daniel Dubois, having him there is probably some of the best, if not the best, work that Alexander Povetkin could be getting. That's arguably the best preparation for Anthony Joshua that he can get, because Daniel Dubois offers those same difficulties, those same perils that Anthony Joshua will pose to Alexander Povetkin the night of the fight. This is some of the best work that he could be getting. And the inference that you could make is the night of the fight, Alexander Povetkin, whether you like him or you don't like him, whether you respect him or you don't respect him, the inference you could make is that no matter how you feel about this guy, the night of the fight, he's coming to go to war. He's coming, and he's really gonna go for it. Alexander Povetkin is not one of the more physically imposing heavyweights in the heavyweight division. That much is immediately apparent. But don't let that fool you into thinking that this guy is some kind of walk in the park.
He's not.
With respect to all the other heavyweights that are out there, Alexander Povetkin is a far cry from a Johan Duapis or an Eric Molina. He's a cut above those kinds of guys. You gotta realize that there is an element of danger in facing Alexander Povetkin. This guy's only ever lost to Vladimir Klitschko, and that was a long time ago. If you look at this guy's resume, he's fought a who's who of the top contenders at heavyweight the last 10 years. This is no walk in the park, this is no picnic, and this is not the kind of opponent that you can look past. Even though this isn't a fight that we're all, psyched about, what you've got to realize is that this is still very much a good fight, a very good fight, a fight that I think is going to be visually appealing, and it's also a fight with an element of danger for Anthony Joshua. You guys forget that Alexander Povetkin is a gold medalist too, or did you not know that? Are you guys aware that Alexander Povetkin has the skill and the killer instinct that a guy like Joseph Parker doesn't have? Joseph Parker, this guy is a skilled fighter, and he shows flashes of those skills from time to time, but what he lacks is a killer instinct. And that's why his fight with Joshua got so much criticism, that people felt Parker wasn't really going for it. Well, you don't have to worry about that shit with Alexander Povetkin, because he will go for it. He's got the killer instinct that Parker doesn't have. In Povetkin, you have one of the more experienced, if not one of the most experienced guys in the entire division, okay? This guy's been in there with a lot of fucking guys. You've got one of the most experienced guys in the division, one of the more skilled contenders, if not the most skilled contender, and that is proven over time. You don't have to wonder if Povetkin's been in there with a lot of somebodies. He actually has, and his skills are bankable. In this guy, you've got experience, you've got skill, and you've got killer instincts. You come across a lot of these contenders, and they may have one or two of these kinds of properties, whereas in Povetkin, you've got all three. You've got experience, skill, and moxie. The gusto, the cojones to go in there, and if if you see an opportunity to go for the knockout, you fucking go for it. The David Price fight, it's a funny fight, because a lot of people saw that fight, and they saw that David Price landed a really hard shot on Povetkin, and that shot sent him reeling into the ropes. But what doesn't get said is, you see that Alexander Povetkin weathered the blow. He weathered the blow and won the fight, went on to win the fight by way of knockout against what is a bigger guy, a younger guy. That's the kind of guy that Joshua's going to be facing. So the fact that I see people out there complaining like this isn't a good fight, or like this is some kind of cherry, because they're mad that the Wilder fight didn't happen. And I'm not going to keep rehatching that shit. We know why that fight didn't happen. We all know why. You can blame Wilder for that. But the fact that there are so many people complaining like this isn't a good fight and this won't be a vision, like you guys just don't know nothing about the heavyweight division, I gather. You must not, if you're looking past Alexander Povetkin like he's some kind of fucking scrub. I'll tell you, you're gonna pick a cherry, you don't pick Alexander Povetkin, because a cherry is what he's not. So back to the point. When I see these images of Alexander Povetkin sporting his cookie on the left side of his face, what I see is a guy who's preparing to dig deep. I see a guy who's preparing to go for it. There's an old sports saying that you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And there's a lot of truth in that saying, there really is. Well, that saying doesn't apply to Alexander Povetkin because he's the kind of guy to take the shot, to go for it. That could get him knocked out, that could get the other guy knocked out. But the inference you can make is that one way or another, this guy's gonna go for it. And that does pose an element of danger to Anthony Joshua. And in other news, on September 13th, two of the most prominent contenders in the women's super middleweight division will be squaring off for the WBC interim title. Marisela La Diva Cornejo will be taking on Franchon Cruz, former Olympian Franchon Cruz, who was on the same Olympic team as not only Michaela Mayer, but Marlene Esparza and Clarissa Shields. And my preliminary thoughts regarding this fight are, this is about one of the best fights that could be made in the women's super middleweight division. You know, this is a division where fighters like this, contenders like this, that are talented, they really can't afford to bypass each other. They can't afford to avoid each other because this isn't a division that has as many high-profile names as the women's lightweight division, or even the welterweight division, I dare say. The talent pool at super middleweight is much thinner than it is in other weight classes in women's boxing, and it's for this reason that the good fighters, the talented fighters, the fighters that actually have a solid skill set with a solid backing, these kinds of fighters, they can't afford to avoid each other because there's no other way for them to raise their profile. So they're put in a situation where they have no choice but to take risks. They have no choice but to take chances. This is a part of the reason that, Franchon Cruz debuted against Clarissa Shields. And she actually suffered her first professional loss in her professional debut. She's only got a record of 3-1. So she's still getting her feet wet as a professional, but she doesn't have the luxury of being on the bring-along process the way some other fighters do because the talent pool isn't that deep. There aren't as many names to choose from, to garner experience, to hone her skills. So a fighter like Franchon, she has no choice but to take on a stiff opponent like Marisela Cornejo. Marisela Cornejo, who hasn't lost a fight since 2016 when she took on Callie Reese. That's the same Callie Reese that dropped undisputed welterweight champion Cecilia Brækhus. Marisela Cornejo hasn't lost a fight since 2016, and since that time, she's been on a hot streak. She's won 8 consecutive fights in a row. And I'm gonna tell you something. I'm not a fan of Golden Boy Promotions. Quite honestly, I don't even fucking like Oscar De La Hoya. But I have to take my hat off to Golden Boy for how they've been handling the career of Marisela Cornejo, because I think they've been doing all the right things for their girl. I think they have been doing all the right things for their fighter. She's been busy, she's been getting better, fight by fight. The improvement is visible. So ahead of this September 13th fight with Franchon Cruz, you could argue that Marisela Cornejo does have a bit of an edge. She does have a bit of an advantage. More than one advantage, actually. On one hand, Marisela Cornejo does have more professional experience than Franchon, but she's also been the busier fighter. The busier fighter who's had more opportunities to fine-tune her skills, hone those skills, whilst garnering professional experience. Franchon has only got a total of 4 professional fights, one of which she lost. That was her debut against Clarissa. But she hasn't had the chance to really get her feet wet as much as Marisela has. So being the busier fighter may in turn make Marisela the more confident fighter. Just as well, Marisela also happens to be the taller, longer fighter in the fight. Marisela is a statuesque super middleweight. She stands in at about 5'10" to Franchon, who's about 5'7".
Don't drink water.
She's a stockier fighter than Marisela Cornejo, and that could pose some difficulties whilst trying to get inside and land meaningful punches because she's gonna have to. There's no way that Franchon can win this fight by fighting the fight on the outside. So it's a very interesting fight because Franchon has the background that Marisela doesn't have, but Marisela has the professional experience that Franchon doesn't have. Very interesting fight, and like I said, I think it's one of the best fights that could be made in the super middleweight division because these girls, they can't afford to keep avoiding each other or staying away from each other or taking lighter touches. They can't afford to do that while at the same time trying to raise their profile with the boxing community. These are the kinds of fights that lay the foundation for what could be a superstar. This is what it takes. These are the kind of risks involved that yield great rewards. In an ideal world, Franchon Cruz would have had a few more tune-up fights and bring-along fights before she'd be taking on an opponent like this in an ideal world. But that's the problem, that it's not an ideal world, and this is not an ideal situation. The talent pool at 168 pounds, it's not as extensive as it is in some other divisions. So sometimes you're faced with these kinds of fights between fighters that, maybe they need a little bit more experience. But at the same time, you're not going to get anywhere if you don't have these kinds of fights. So I do look forward to the fight in September 13th. I'm gonna have my eyes peeled for the fight, but I'll tell you that, Marisela Cornejo, you could argue that she's got the edge here. Or at least, she's got the edge in a few areas. We'll get into a full fight breakdown as the fight date approaches.
And now it's time for the segment of Q&A, where we here dissect comments from you, the members, to assess their stupidity and embarrass you into exile.
Now, I'm not gonna split hairs over the load of bullshit that Edogz typed under the last video I posted, because this guy's a bullshit artist. You gotta realize that. Every single argument that he makes, while he thinks it's intricate and elaborate, and he's making all sorts of counterpoints, most of what this guy says, if you actually take the time to read it, it's just a lot of bullshit.
It is.
It's a lot of opinions, it's a lot of speculations. This guy's still holding out hope that Deontay Wilder will become the A-side in negotiations with Anthony Joshua. Yet there are already published numbers out there that show who the A-side is, but he can't accept that because he's so in love and so enamored with Wilder that he will continue to make these arguments that aren't based on anything.
They're not.
They're not based on Deontay Wilder's viewership numbers or his pay-per-view numbers, because he doesn't fucking have pay-per-view numbers. They're not based on his net worth. They're not based on his earning power and what he gets paid per fight. Yet this guy is still holding out hope that somehow a Tyson Fury fight would make Wilder the A-side in negotiations, when at best, it can get him an improved offer, but it's not gonna make him the A-side. I'm sorry. Nevertheless, Edogz continues to frequent this channel, and for the life of me, I don't know why. Because we all know that this guy is not only a sycophant for Deontay Wilder, but he's a PBC shill.
He is.
And all you want to hear is that PBC is always right, and the rest of the world is always wrong. When that's not the case. You know that Edogz was one of the main guys crying and complaining that the contract Joshua sent Wilder, that it didn't have a date and a venue on it. But this Fury shit don't have a date and a venue on it. You ain't bitching and moaning about that.
Exactly.
You say that Al Heyman is this all-powerful specter in the sport of boxing. He's this spectre that can snap his fingers and make all of us disappear. Yet it seems like these guys had to go to Frank Warren for what's supposed to be a fight in America to help them finance this, this $50 million email, whatever it was. I guess they had to go to him for help. Why do all these powers have to combine like Planeteers when, according to you, Al Heyman is the most powerful thing in the universe since Thanos and the Infinity Rings and the Infinity Gauntlet? I can poke holes at this guy's arguments all day because it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Nothing he says is based on reality. Most of it, 90% of it, is opinions and speculations and what you choose to believe. You're sitting here saying that Joshua ducked a guy who he offered 2 contracts. Not 1 contract, but 2 contracts. And both times, the guy that fucked the fight up, the guy who walked away because he couldn't get what he wanted like an angry child, was Deontay Wilder. And I guess what I want to communicate here is, I don't give a fuck if you're a fan of Deontay Wilder. When are you going to understand that? When are you going to understand that because you're a PBC shill and because you're a Deontay Wilder sycophant, that doesn't mean that you're right, you know? That doesn't even mean that your argument makes sense. Most of the time, your arguments don't make sense because we know what these fighters' net worth is. We know what these fighters are making fight by fight. Not that long ago, members of the LDBC tried to insinuate that Joshua's pay-per-view numbers were fabricated, and shortly after that, his pay-per-view numbers were posted by Sky Sports. And there's nothing fabricated about the money that this guy's generating. You can look at the 90,000 people in these stadiums and see that this guy is a huge fucking draw. But Edogz, like members of the LDBC, they're not necessarily trying to call it down the middle or even expose the truth. What they're doing is running a smear campaign. And that's why I don't know why he comes here. Because you don't need to come here to run a smear campaign. My guess is that you come here to try to muddy up the truth. That's why you keep coming here. It's not because you like what I'm saying, because you clearly don't. What you try to come here to do is to spin reality and bend the truth. You know, Anthony Joshua got 420,000 people to buy his fight with fucking Dylan White. Do you think that Deontay Wilder could get 420,000 people here in America to buy that same fight?
No.
What about a fight with Eric Molina? We know that Wilder fought him first, but do you think that 400,000 people would have paid to see Wilder fight that guy on pay-per-view?
No.
Could Deontay Wilder move close to 1 million pay-per-views with Carlos Takam? Could he move half that amount? We know Joshua moved something like 887,000 pay-per-views in his own backyard fighting Carlos Takam. Could Wilder do half of that here in America? Y'all know the answer to that question, and so does Edogz. That's a resounding fucking no.